Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you, so I think we are ready to
Kristen,
go.
can you hear me okay?
I can hear you. Thank you for replying. They can hear you.
Okay, perfect. Okay, thank you, Brenton. Yes, okay. So for those of you, I think most of you know me. For those of you who may not know me, I'm Lindy Powell. I'm the Executive Director here at St. Joseph Institute for the Deaf. I am so excited to share with you tonight some tips on how to encourage reading at home. Those of you who may know a little bit about my background, you may know that I am a teacher of the deaf by trade. I am a licensed or a certified listening and spoken language specialist. And a lot of people don't realize I'm also a reading specialist. So I have my master's in reading instruction. So this is a topic I'm very passionate about and would love to talk with you and pick your brains about how that's working at home and as you're developing those listening and spoken language skills too. As Kristen mentioned, we're recording the session, so I think that has started already. And then at the end of the quick presentation I have to share with you this evening, we'll have some time for question and answers, comments, like she mentioned as well. So if you have questions during the presentation, feel free to drop them in the chat and I will answer. So 5 tips to encourage reading at home. One thing I want to mention is that while we're encouraging reading, the goal is really to create a love of reading in your child. You want to make books really approachable and you don't want it to be intimidating or any kind of situation that would have a lot of pressure associated with it. You want to build those positive experiences with books. Let your child explore them and play with books and all of that. All of that is going to build the foundation for lifelong reading and this love for reading. And then once we encourage reading and we have that approachable nature around books, then your child will begin to learn to read eventually. So a lot of parents think that this time should really be you teaching your child to read. And to start at home, it's really not about teaching your child. It's about exposing them to books and also encouraging that love of reading at home. So this presentation tonight will not touch on how to teach your child to read, but will help you build that foundation to encourage reading in the home that will carry over into the classroom and when they are learning to read later on. The 5 tips that we'll go over this evening are outlined here, and I'll dive deeper into each of them as we go through. So the first one is to expose your child to a variety of text. The second is to create reading routines within your home. The third is to model independent reading, and this is modeling it from the parent. So the parent modeling themselves reading for information, reading for entertainment, and that. And the fourth is pointing out text to self connections, which we'll dive a little deeper in and explain what those look like and how you can do that. And the fifth is an important listening and spoken language strategy as well, to create conversations and not just questions. And also when there's lots of pressure around learning to read, and again, this isn't about teaching your child to read, but really creating interactions and connections with books. So creating those conversations and not quizzing and creating questions can be beneficial there. So the first tip that's listed here is exposing your child to a variety of text. I do have some research to cite here that shows that the quantity and quality of read alouds plays a big part in language and literacy readiness. I know that there's that research out there that you've probably heard before that tells you you should read to your child 20 minutes a day. You've probably seen billboards or posters and all of that, and that's true. There is research to support that 20 minutes a day can be beneficial. What I really like about this research is that it's telling you that the quality of the time that you spend with your child really is just as important or outweighs the quantity or that certain minute amount that you're reading with your child. Going to read with my child or expose them to books 20 minutes a day when our life is so hectic and our schedule is crazy. And this is telling you it's okay if it's only 2 minutes a day to start. And that 2 minutes, you are really well connected with your child and you're enjoying that time with your child, and there's quality behind that time that you're spending with them. In order to expose them to a variety of texts, you can also rotate books frequently. Even if you don't have a large library at home, you can take advantage of your local library, or you can take the small amount of books that you do have and rotate them and only keep 2 or 3 out at a time. That keeps it really engaging and exciting, surprising for your child. And then it also helps your child not only navigate toward or gravitate toward one book, but it be exposed to a variety of books and a variety of text, because that's going to show them how reading can look very different depending on the context or the purpose that a text is written. And then be sure to read rich text, even if it's above your child's language. If you can picture your child's language as a piece of pie or a whole pie, we've got the whole pie here, and you'll say the whole pie is all of the words that your child should know. There's a little sliver of that pie that's a tiny piece of pie that's actually what your child is saying. And sometimes we get stuck only talking about that little sliver because we think that's all they understand, when they have the capacity to know so many more words. So it's okay if you're reading a book and 90% of the words your child doesn't say yet, because that exposure to them is going to be so beneficial to build that vocabulary. And a lot of those books are going to have really neat pictures that go along with it too. So it can still be engaging to talk about the pictures and draw them in while you're exposing them to that higher level vocabulary. I know we have some early intervention families here, and this is specific for babies, but you can also take this and generalize it to older children too, and just think about the variety of books that you have. So if you know that your child really loves a certain type of book, it can be tempting to buy only that book or only that series or character. And this is a great example of ways you can build in variety to your child's at-home library, even with just 10 books to start. So with babies, we would look at things like aging, a book about a daily routine, which is great for older kids too, a fiction storybook, a book with first words. First word books are some of your first nonfiction books because they're not about stories. So they're informational text, and exposing your child to books like that is going to show them that there are various genres within reading. A book with simple pictures help your child listen more to what you're explaining and what you're saying. They only have one thing to be distracted with visually. But then in turn, having a book with elaborate expand on that language and give your child more to say as well. A book with repetition is great from the infant years on. It helps your child as they're building those skills like auditory closure. So if there's repetition on each page and you're repeating a phrase, you can pause and wait for them to fill in and read the text with you and interact in a way that way. Rhyming books are great for all ages, infant through early childhood and early primary, because it's helping your child build those phonemic awareness skills and also creates a predictability to the pattern of the text. A multisensory book can also be good, even for older kids. At the infant level, it's great if it's tactile and they can explore or they can get their hands on it in a different way. And it's okay if it's upside down or they're flipping it backwards. It's all about exposure to those books. And lastly, a book that's loved by you as the parent. So there are lots of books that we ended up with our own library or within our own library here that honestly aren't enjoyable for me or my husband to read. So in those situations, you're not going to have that quality in the connection between you and your child when you are trying to build that love of reading. So if you truly don't love reading this book and you feel forced to read this book with your child, maybe it's time to part ways and figure out a way that you can pick another book that would be really enjoyable for you to read so that you'd be able to build that connection to and model that love of reading with your child. The second tip is to create reading routines within your home. So there's really no wrong time to read a book. You can read a book any time of the day. So if you think about what your daily routine is like, it may not look like your average day. It may look different every day. It may be different on the weekends versus the weekday. So think about when you can build in some routines that would be easy to. You can sprinkle books around the house. They can be on the couch, on your nightstand, in your bedroom, in your child's room, in your purse, in the car, wherever you can put them. And that's going to give you the opportunity to also think about, oh, this is a good opportunity to read, and we can build this into our routine. Maybe every time we are waiting in the doctor's office, or every time that we're waiting outside school before school begins, we're going to read, and that's part of our daily routine. You can create a reading nook in your home. So something that's predictable about that, put the same things in the little area. There are many elaborate things that parents have done to create a reading nook with a tent or a special chair, but it can really be very simple and just a basket or a box with a familiar toy or blanket that's comforting for your child and that they can connect to reading time. And then I mentioned this just now, but make reading special by including favorite toys or objects. So if there's not something specific that's in this reading nook in your box, but they have a special friend that they sleep with every night, or they have a special security blanket, or there's a favorite Lego toy that they have, whatever it might be, encourage them to bring that while you're reading and let them interact with the book in that way. Let them fidget, let them play while they're listening as well. And then going back to there's no wrong time to read a book, really think beyond bedtime. So we think that there's pressure in that bedtime or nightly routine to say we have to read a book before bed, and sometimes it's just not feasible. So if you think beyond bedtime and pick another time of day that might be more consistent for you, you would be able to build those routines easier. So this is an example. Here's my son, Henry. That's my blanket that he loves and that he thinks is his reading blanket. And then that's his little friend, Diego, that he sleeps with every night. And so this picture was probably taken about a year and a half ago. But this was something that he had done on his own. And I was so proud to turn around and see. It was during COVID and I was working from home and he was there and I felt bad I couldn't connect with him. And while I was working, I turned around, used to read together and his Diego toy, and he was reading on his own. So by building in that routine, he then found comfort and enjoyment in doing that on his own too. The third tip that we have is modeling independent reading. And I mentioned that this is your child seeing you read, not necessarily your child reading independently like we just saw Henry doing. So your child needs to see you reading to understand that reading is a lifelong activity. This isn't just something that we do at school. This isn't just something that we do at home. But we can do this in all contexts of our life, and it's really a valuable skill to have, and it's an enjoyable skill. So think beyond books. You can model reading for different purposes. So modeling reading for different purposes would mean that you're modeling reading while you're cooking, while you're looking at a magazine, We just got the toy catalog in the mail for Christmas time, and we modeled reading that and making notes while you're working from home. Like I mentioned, that might be the reality for some of us right now. So while you're working from home, if you're shown that you're reading and your child's asking for attention, you could explain what you're doing and model that you're reading through all these things. The other thing is on your phone. So a lot of us have email or something, or that it's not just something that we're watching on our phone. Your child will understand then that reading doesn't just happen with books, and it's this lifelong skill. The fourth tip is to point out text to self connections. So these are connections that you can make with a book about what's going on in your own life. Text to self connections occur when the reader thinks beyond what's just on the pages, and then they think about, what have I experienced? What have I done? What about this makes me think about my life? You can point out simple text to self connections about objects or body parts and show them, to start really simple. There's a character in a book, look, he has a nose just like you have a nose. So little connections like that, just to bring it into, this book is kind of abstract, but we can make a connection to something that's happening in my life here. You can remind your child of their different experiences, showing pictures of what you've done. So if it's a book about going to the zoo and you have those pictures to show them, to make that connection. That can be before the book, that can be after the book, it could be when it's appropriate, if during reading, if your child seems really interested you could tell your child's thinking about some of those connections. And you can point out text to self connections about you too. So if it's something maybe your child hasn't experienced, or it's something different about you that's different from your child, you can model making those connections. Those connections are going to be what lays the foundation for them to understand that there's meaning within reading too, and that when you read, there's purpose. You can learn, you can grow, this is enjoyable to see that this is connected to me in my life. So even modeling reading for entertainment. I have some examples here of those text to self connections. So this is one of our favorite books in the house here, called I Am a Garbage Truck. Simple board book, just talks about the garbage truck coming to the house, picking up the trash, taking it to the landfill, and then does the same thing with the recycling truck. But some text to self connections that I can model is that, oh, I helped take the trash out. We have trash in the house, and I helped take the trash out to the curb. And then the garbage truck comes. So just like the people in this book, we have trash that we have to take outside. Another text to self connection that I could model, which I personally don't love garbage trucks, but my son does. So you really love garbage trucks, right? This book is all about garbage trucks. That's a neat connection that you have with this book. And another thing to bring it into play, or maybe some items that you have in the house, is to think, oh, I have a toy that's just like this. I have a garbage truck toy. Maybe you bring that with you while you're reading the book. So making those connections to things that are happening in real life can make more meaning out of the book instead of just flipping the pages and listening to the words. The last tip that I have for you is to create conversations and not questions. So I mentioned that this is also deeply rooted in listening and spoken language practice and how we build those auditory verbal skills. I say here to select authentic text to read with your child. Memes and how you can look for authentic text. They're easy to find. Respond to your child's questions is the next part of this tip. So if you notice that your child is curious or your child starts asking questions, respond to them and create a conversation back and forth. Expand on your child's comments. So if your child says something, you might think, oh, I can ask a question back and say, well, what would happen next? Or who did that? Or where was that? but just expand on the comment. So if they said, wow, I really liked when the bear jumped in the pond, then you could say, yeah, I bet he got all wet. I wonder how long it took for him to dry off. So you can create those conversations back and forth instead of a questioning, more pressure-filled situation where they might be put on the spot. I'm guilty of this all the time. I did it at bedtime tonight where I was asking a question and he just looked at me and was just saying, I don't know, Mom, I don't know. And he was kind of shutting down. Use phrases when you want to ask those questions. Use phrases like, I wonder. So instead of, who did this? And we should know who did this. We were reading a version of Goldilocks and the Three Bears. And I kept asking, who sat in the chair? Who did this? I should have said, oh, I wonder who sat in the chair, and just leave it at that. And there's no pressure there. We're kind of asking each other. I'm saying, I wonder. And that opens it up for me to wait and see if he responds. And then to say, oh, I think it must have been Goldilocks. I wonder, it must have been her. You can also say something like, let's look for this together. Instead of saying, where's this? Where's that? Where's this? So if you act like you're looking for it too, it creates an opportunity for you to work with your child instead of putting your child on the spot and quizzing them. And tell me while you're doing these read alouds and working with your child to build this love of reading, because the purpose is not to quiz and figure out where they are in terms of their language or reading comprehension. The purpose of times like this is really to just build that connection and to hopefully foster that love of reading with your child. So this will tell you a little bit about authentic text. So I mentioned that it's so tempting as a child gets older, 3, 4, and reading, and parents want to go out and buy the books that are here. These books are great for teaching reading. And if you're ready for that, and there's a space for that, and you have time for that, then that's fine. But authentic text is text that's written to inform, entertain, to document something. It's just general stories, general texts that you would typically read, storybooks that you typically read to your child. Authentic text is not written for the purpose of teaching your child. So these are and like I mentioned, they're not bad to purchase. They're not bad to have in your home. Just understand that these are going to lean more toward that instructional purpose. So when you're interacting with your child, there's just really a natural draw toward trying to get your child to read or answer questions, and they're just more instructional and structured in nature. Whereas authentic text, just like general storybooks, a novel that you'd read at home, a cookbook, whatever it is, those are written for you to read, not to teach you how to read. So that's the difference there. So exposure to those vocabulary, it will provide more opportunities, and they typically have more elaborate pictures, like I mentioned, and all of those opportunities that you'd have to interact with your child without pressure aligned with it. So that is all I had to go over with you today. So the rest of tonight, I should say, the rest of the time that we have together, you can feel free to unmute. You can feel free to put your camera on if you have questions or comments. I'm here and would love to hear anything that you all have to share. Kristen, are you still there?
I
wanna
am
make
still
sure
here.
Everyone can still hear me.
Yes. So
Okay,
if you have
great.
any questions, feel free to
Do you
just,
have any thoughts or questions, Kristen, to kick us off? What are your first thoughts?
My first thought as working with children who are deaf and hard of hearing and listening in spoken language, the biggest take-home tip, I think, for me and hopefully to coach my parents in our parent coaching sessions is that last one, to create the conversations and to have those conversations that are occurring when you're reading books and to make it more back and forth, a naturalistic conversation versus a question and answer, which can happen when you're reading books. So I think having that in the back of my mind when I'm doing book shares in speech or pushing it in the classroom.
Yes, and it's one of the hardest things to do, especially when you're trying to teach a child to read too, once we get to that early kindergarten age.
Feel free to ask a question. I can stop the recording because I know that is hard. So I'm just going to stop the recording. If you have